Good morning, afternoon, or evening, sports fans, whenever you might be listening to our podcast. I'm John Buzby. He's Marty. Sheehan, as the intro suggests, and we appreciate you following us along wherever you listen to your podcast. Don't forget, we're also on YouTube. It's the best of Delaware sports debates, where we put our clips, we shorten them up for you and get them on YouTube. But we appreciate you sharing, liking, and don't forget, you can send us our comments on Twitter or Facebook, DE Sports Debate. That's DE Sports Debate. You can see our comments. Send us your own if you would like. And we're going to dive right in, Marty, to the first round of the playoffs, which went as some people hoped it would not go, but the way a lot of us, including you and me, thought it might. And you tweeted out a statistic last night. And so I'm going to give you that opportunity to review that statistic real fast.
Yeah, this was interesting. This was it's the season of holiday parties, and everybody always says, oh, the more the merrier. There was nothing merrier about the more in this weekend's football playoffs. We had 7 games. 4 of them were shutouts. In fact, only in two games did the losing team score an offensive point. Hodgson's score was a fumble return. So you had a total combined score in the three the two classes, 2A and 3A this week, the 7 games, of 234-19. The losing teams scored 13 offensive points. No losing team, of course, scored more than 7 points. The average score was 33-3. And it was actually worse at the 3A level. The tally was 111-6, and not one offensive point was scored by the 3 losing 3A teams, again because Hodgson scored on a fumble return. So this was I hated to think this all weekend, but the big surprise for me this weekend was that there was not a single surprise. Everything went exactly according to script, and people listen to the podcast, they heard us say, look, the only close game is going to be St. Mark's and Howard. Because Howard has a good program, a very good coach, and they have that ability. And that's how it played out. These games, and I watched among the 3 games that were live streamed on Friday night, I watched some of them. And they're just, the competitive imbalance in the 3 games was pretty stark.
Yeah, the stat that alarms me of that stat is that no losing team scored more than 7 points.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one thing to get put 48 against you. You kind of expect that when you've got a 5 versus a 12. But if you can't score against the other team, or you can't score, that really shows some imbalance. And, I think nobody would argue it right now that there shouldn't be all 11 teams in Class A. I get why they did it. And one of the reasons they did it is because they feared what would happen is what happened last fall, where COVID would come into play. Thank goodness it didn't.
No.
And so there weren't things where teams had to not play games because of that. And so that was one of the big reasons that they put all 11 teams in Class A. And so it'll be interesting to see, and I hear different things that, this is a 2-year plan, which is typically what they've done in the past. They've realigned every 2 years based on school enrollment. So that makes sense. But I also know that the DIAA has the power to make this a 1-year plan. And I'm not suggesting we go back to the way it was. I don't think you think that way either. We've been pretty vocal about that. We agree with this concept, with this philosophy, as do a lot of people. It's just, is it worth testing again next year whether all 11 teams should be in the playoffs in Class 3? Or have we proven that that doesn't need to be? And let's go ahead and change that regulation and swap that out and get back to, I'm fine with 8 teams.
Yep. And you know what? Dr. Layfield at the meeting actually said it was his understanding, after talking with the football committee, that the 2 years really only pertained to teams in their classifications.
Gotcha.
So he said, I would not necessarily not expect a change in the playoff structure. He said that might be something they look at and decide, okay, this didn't work. We're going to alter this for next year. Now the teams are going to be stuck in their classifications, but there's some easy fixes, I think, like you just said, with the 8 teams making it or 6 teams making it. It's something has to change. This was not a fun week. And somebody sent me an interesting text, because I was thinking about the parents and the winning team. That this couldn't have been a great experience for them. I mean, teams get juiced to play close games, and then I started thinking about the kids on, how fun was that for Concord? To be down like 34-0 mid-second quarter, and it's just not a good overall scene.
And if somebody gets hurt on the winning team, you lose. That's what I kept thinking last night when I was at the Appo game. An Appo game that was a blowout.
Yep.
If Ryan Von Brandt gets hurt, we got no shot next week. against Middletown. We might as well, I mean, that's just the way. I mean, he's a big part of the offense. Or McConomy, same thing. Right. And again, it basically becomes, these games in some cases, the 5 versus the 12s in Class 2 and the games we saw in Class 3 are not a whole lot different than the consolation volleyball game that I gripe against. I mean, because again, and this is we're not trying to offend anybody's team. We're trying actually, I think, in some cases to help.
Yes.
Because Cape, which has a huge fan base at home, notorious fan base of being great fans. They had about one person per parent at the game last night at Appo. Oh. In fact, I tweeted that out. It was disappointing. I mean, it's an hour ride, not even an hour. It's about 50 minutes from Cape Cod Open to Appo. And yet, the kids showed up, but the fans didn't. Now, I'm sure the parents did. That's probably who was over in the bleachers.
Right.
But, I mean, it looked like the game was in Chicago and only those that could afford to fly out flew out. And so that was disappointing. And I'm not bashing the Cape fans. And this probably took place in other places as well. I wasn't at the William Penn game. I'm not sure if there were a lot of Hots and kids there, students, fans, parents who aren't fans. And so, again, it's just the reality of it. And so let's not dive deep into this because I know we plan to spend some time after the season's over, maybe spend a whole show talking about what we feel should happen, getting comments from listeners and advice, and maybe have a couple guests on, maybe have Jim Comegys on to talk about it, that kind of thing. So don't want to spend a lot of time on that. Let's go to the games themselves. DMA at Concord, number 5 versus number 12, played at DMA's new stadium. First playoff game ever there. First playoff win for DMA. Finally got that monkey off their back of going 8-2, 9-1 in regular seasons and getting bounced in the first round of the playoffs. They won 52-0. 2 punts were blocked and returned for touchdowns. I think you texted me that, Marty.
Yep.
I wasn't watching the game. I was at a game. And that set the stage as DMA just rolled to a big win, 52-0. As you said, couldn't have been fun for anybody on either side, but they got in it, they got through it, and they move on.
They did. And DMA, boy, this was like, and the Newark game looked very similar to this in terms of the Concord quarterback Colin Pye was basically just running for his life all night. The line play was so dominating from DMA, and on the 2 block punts, I mean, one of them, the entire team just swarmed the punter. I was actually glad that he wasn't hurt. And that was returned for a touchdown. Then the second punt was actually kind of funny. It was a bad snap, and the punter picked it up and tried to punt it. But by that time, a DMA player, and it was DeFair Watts Henry, was there. And when the punter threw the ball up to kick it, he just grabbed it out of the air, standing in the end zone. And that was that. I hadn't seen that. Funny. I got to admit, I had not seen that.
I've never seen that.
So it was a really cool play. Unfortunately for Concord, it kind of put the wraps on a 35-0 halftime lead for DMA. And yeah, it was just, these 2 teams played twice in the final. It was 95-0 was the combined score of the 2 games this season. So not a lot of fun had there by anyone. But for DMA, they finally do get the monkey off their back, and now they move into a huge game at Caravelle next week.
Yeah, that's going to be exciting. That might be one I put on my calendar to go to. It's 5 miles from my house. Concord 4-7. They finish up their season and look forward, or they will be looking ahead to next year. All right, you mentioned Delmar and Newark, number 6 versus number 11. These teams combined for 17 state titles in the history of football. Delmar's all in Division 1 or Division 2 at the time. Newark in Division 1 back in their heyday. Been a long time since Newark's been in the playoffs, let alone won a state championship. And Delmar proved to be the one that's won state championships more recently, or at least been in contestant for them. And they win 43-7. And so, again, long bus ride for Newark down there. They come into the game 5-5. When's the last time a 500 team got into playoffs? I'm not sure it's ever happened since they started the playoff system. And so, but hats off to Jody Russell and his players. It would have been much easier to call the IAA committee, say, hey, look, we're not coming. We're done, roster issues, whatever. And again, we talked about this last week. Hats off to all these teams. We're not trying to put down any team. We're trying to just explain what's happened and try to get our arms around why it's happening and whether it should happen again next year. So hats off to Newark for showing up, and they showed up, they went down. I'm sure they played hard, and they just couldn't come away, couldn't stay in the game with Delmar 43-7. That is a tough place to play in any circumstance. Certainly tough to play on a playoff game.
It was very loud. And again, the Delmar, line play was just outstanding, especially the defensive line just broke through every single time. Again, the quarterback just running for his life. And someone tweeted me after the game and said, can you imagine explaining to your 1980s self that Delmar would be blowing out Newark in the playoffs someday? And you're like,
Right.
wow, that kind of puts it in perspective as to where these programs have gone.
Facing each other, let alone.
Yeah, that's
blowing
oh my
one
gosh,
out,
you're right. Yeah, guys, Newark would be in the top level and in those days. This was a nice win for Delmar in front of the home crowd. J.W. Warner, 60-yard TD run, and Delmar now moves into a really interesting game against Friends. That's the most interesting thing about that is they played in the opener and Friends won 28-0. So
Wow.
Delmar's a completely different team since then. Now you can say Friends is also very improved, but so far I'd say 2 games in, we have 2 interesting matchups to look forward to from the winning teams next week.
Yeah, and we said that this first round might be rough, but the second round, certainly after that should be interesting. Newark finishes its season 5-6 under head coach Jody Russell. Tower Hill and Sussex Tech. The next 2 games were relatively close. We're going to talk about number 7 Tower Hill, number 10 Sussex Tech. I was at the Apo game for this, Marty. You followed it pretty closely, so I'll let you talk about that. Tower Hill ends up winning 14-0, shutting out the Ravens. And again, this is a Ravens team that was in Division I and in the Division I playoffs not too long ago.
And this is interesting. The 3 games yesterday, not one of them was live streamed, and not one of them was carried on a radio broadcast. So it was really tough to keep up with these games. Guys like you and Mike Peatlock and Benny Mitchell were at these games providing some updates to folks. But the tweets I started getting about this game, because I started asking around about who might be at the game, what they see, were basically it was a down effort from Tower Hill that they couldn't get anything going. Now, some people did say the Sussex Tech defense really came to play, and that's pretty evident from the score. Brendan Hickey, the quarterback for Tower Hill, run for 110 yards and a touchdown. But it was the defense again, just based on what I've heard and read, that Sussex Tech offense was just smothered all night long. So again, another team that was in the top level not too long ago is now down at Class 2A and struggling a bit. But this was a good win for Tower Hill. It looked like, or it sounded like, from what I've read, that the nice fan base turned out for this game. And now Tower Hill moves on to the next game where they will. I believe their game is being played at Appoquinimink.
Not down at Woodbridge?
Is that where Tower Hill's going, to Woodbridge?
I think so. Let me look at. Yeah, they're going to Woodbridge.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Maybe it's another game I'm thinking of then. Okay. So a good win for Tower Hill. The Hillers come out 14-0, and again, just another game where the opposing team just can't generate any offense. It seemed like the theme of the night, the 2 nights, basically afternoon and nights, were defense.
Right.
Where say defense wins championships. Well, it certainly wins first round games in the new realigned DIA playoffs.
You might be thinking of the Wilmington Friends game, because I'm looking at the schedule here,
of, yes.
And it says site to be announced, and there's no reason. It's scheduled for Saturday at 1, and then Wilmington Friends is going to be the home opponent. And so if it was going to be at Wilmington Friends, I'm not sure why they wouldn't have announced that.
Wilmington, Friends actually has the game listed on their website as at Appoquinimink.
Okay, I don't know whether Friends can't, that there are certain things you have to have at your stadium to host a game. Mainly, you've got to have a point of entry, 1 point of entry and 1 point of exit, or a way to control it.
If I recall, Friends, I do not believe they have a fence around the facility.
Probably more like St. Andrews and like St. George's was until they got that changed. So that would explain that. All right, the last one, St. Mark's and Howard. St. Mark's wins at 14-6. They got 2 first half touchdowns. That's all they would need. In the second half, they just pounded the ball on the ground. I was watching this game on the NFHS network. My oldest son was actually there. And it was just it was one of those games you've seen in the graveyard before. St. Mark's gets the lead. They have a chance. They've got that big offensive line. They've got runners, and they were just able to, force it down. The defense also forced some turnovers, which thwarted a couple of Howard drives, and Howard just couldn't pull it off in the end.
No, and this was, there was a couple of tweets I saw where people said, well, this proves that Howard deserved to be a playoff team. And I watched the game, and I was less convinced that they were a playoff team.
That's my Cinderella team, Marty. That's my Cinderella team you're talking about.
They had 4 first downs the entire game. And one of them came on a 65-yard drive where I believe they had 3 of those 4. They just could not move the football. Again, defense was the name of the game. Donovan Artis, I thought Howard did a nice job containing him. He's been the big guy for St. Mark's all year. But it was actually Logan Klein through the air. And the first touchdown was great. Now, anyone who's watched Good Morning Football in the mornings on the NFL Network, there's a segment they do called Angry Runs every week. And boy, Logan Klein unleashed an angry run. He just absolutely steamrolled a defender for Howard at about the 10-yard line and then waltzed in for the touchdown. So efficient effort from St. Mark's. They were able to run the ball. They maintained possession. But again, their two scores were I believe they were both thrown by Chase Padalano, who's coming back from an injury. But a solid effort from them. The graveyard looked like it was hopping.
Yep.
There were announcers there. I believe Coach Bill Harmon and Nick Alessandrini were on the call for that one. And yeah, it just looked like a really good atmosphere. And Howard did what we thought they would do. They hung around.
Yep.
But they, again, the injuries and some other things throughout the season, just not enough to get them over the edge. So a really nice win for St. Mark's. And it's their first win, by the way, since I believe 2014.
It is correct, against Concord. Yep, when Concord moved back down to Division II. And St. Mark's had recently moved to Division II. And so, and that's been surprising. St. Mark's, when they moved to Division II, they had been, I think, in the Final Four of the Division I playoffs the year before. Maybe even they weren't in the state championship game, but I think they were in the Final Four, and everybody thought, wow, they're going to go into Division II and dominate. And
everybody thought they were going to be the Howard.
Yep. Yeah.
Eventually
exactly.
became in Division II. That's right.
And you mentioned Howard hanging around and in the game, and that's basically what they did to get into the playoffs. They hung around.
You're right.
And Mount Pleasant's loss got them in the playoffs. And I just looked at Howard's schedule. They had 5 wins. One of them was a forfeit from AI. Their only win against a playoff team was against Concord. So, they came in as a 9 seed with knowing that it was going to be a tough road to hoe. And Dan Ritter, hats off. He always does a great job with that squad. I'm not sure there's a better coach that deals with the issues that he has to deal with, and issues the wrong term. They don't have a real field to practice on. It's better than it used to be.
Yep.
Their home field is a bus ride away to Abyssinia. And so he deals with a lot of things there a lot of other coaches don't have to deal with, and he does a great job. They finish up at 5-6, as you mentioned. St. Mark's heading to Archmere. That game is scheduled for Saturday at noon. All right. And in case you wonder why we're not talking about a lot about the next games, we're going to drop a podcast on Friday and talk about the games like we did this last week. We got a lot of plays on that. So we're going to do that again. We'll really dive into all the matchups because a lot of things can change during the week too. This is when we hear about injuries, those types of things. And so we want to make sure we have all the up-to-date information. So our plan is to drop the podcast on Friday at some point before the first kickoff that night. I know Middletown kicks off at 7:00 that night against Appo, and that's going to be a fun game. I don't know if the term rivalry yet can be put in with that for football between those two schools, but It's something they hope to have in the future. All right, let's move to Class 3, Sussex Central and Caesar Rodney High School. I read a story in that Andy Walter did at the Del State News, and he interviewed Dan Candeloro. And, Dan Candeloro pointed out, hey, look, when we played these guys last week, we were only down by 1 at halftime. And he said that's what they're hanging their hats on. He was proud of his team for wanting to show up, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Didn't work out that way. 34-0. Wasn't a running clock, but 1 point shy of that. So again, I want to congratulate the Caesar Rodney Riders. Yes, you're 0-11, but you fought till the end. And you can say, well, they still didn't score. It doesn't matter. They showed up. They played the game. And so hats off to them. I hope Dan Candeloro comes back because he deserves to coach a winning team again, like he did a couple years ago in the playoffs. And so our hats off to them and the job that they did. It says a lot about the coaches, and it says a lot about the coaches that the kids want to continue to play and continue to play hard. And it says a lot about the kids themselves as well. But that game was pretty much what we expected, between a 6 and an 11.
It was. I mean, Caesar Rodney has struggled to score all season. I believe they came into the playoffs 54 points in 10 games. And of course, they ended 54 points in 11 games. So less than 5 points a game they scored during the season. Defensively, you're just not going to be able to hold teams when you can't maintain possession of the ball or put points on the board. So, yeah, this was a tough one. When I read that article, my first thought was, boy, Sussex Central's reading this too and saying, oh, they hung their hat on a 1 point deficit at halftime. Huh? Well, we'll take care of that this week. And they go up 21-0 at halftime this time. And Caesar Rodney never really threatened here. So, yeah, this is, again, a learning experience for everybody, for the football board, for Caesar Rodney, Dan Candeloro's kids, and a good win for Sussex Central, who needs confidence going into a rematch against Sally's next week, and because Sally's really took them to the woodshed in the first meeting this season. Yeah,
that's going to be a good one. Next game, 7 and 10. Appo takes down Cape 36-0. Unlike week 8 when Cape scored 27 points and Appo had to score more than 50 to come away with that win. The Vikings just had no offensive rhythm from the get-go, and they had no answer to the Appo-Quinnipiac ground game. Daniel McConomy, I don't have his stats, but he ran for a lot. I almost guarantee he ran for over 100 yards. Ryan Von Brandt, remember, who was injured the week before.
Yep.
Really, I think he ran twice the week before in that season finale. He was able to run, and that opens up their offense, certainly. And a guy by the name of Xavier Rogers, number 10. He's a big, he's almost like a fullback. They don't really position him as a fullback all the time, but it seems, we were talking in the stands, a couple of his parents, every time he touches the ball, he gains 5 yards. But he doesn't touch it a lot. And I'm not sure about why. I'm sure there's a reason. I'm not questioning the coaching staff. But anyway, it was a solid win. I never felt like Cape was in the game for whatever reason. Obviously the score, but I mean, it wasn't 36-0 in the first quarter. So it was a solid performance by Appo. You know what? There was a lot of confusion a couple times on substitutions. Like there were a couple times they could have had delay of games because they had 2 guys, at one time they had 9 guys on the field and 2 guys weren't there. And there was another play where it was obvious that everybody should know the situation. It was the first series. So Appo gets the ball back. They stop Cape punts. The first series that Appo's going out, you've been talking about that play for the, unless you're all of a sudden, you're going to be somewhere between your own 10 and 30 yard line.
Right.
Here's the play we're running, guys, and here's going to be on the field. You talk about that all week, and somebody had to run on late. So a little confusion there. They're going to have to work on that, or not work on that. They got to figure out why there was some confusion because it was more than once on the substitution thing. So anyway, Appo 36, Cape. And Appo's going to have to go to Middletown and play on a Friday night. Tough place to play. And also, a tough team to play, obviously.
It is. And this was a tough game. And I'm glad you mentioned that because it was kind of a theme of the games that were live streamed on Friday night where the losing teams, there always seemed to be some sort of confusion, whether it was a fumbled snap or whether it was the quarterback having to hurry up and get guys to the line of scrimmage or moved in the right direction. A number of timeouts were called when there were potential delay of game penalties upcoming. So yeah, it's kind of the same thing. It's like I don't know, youth and experience, whatever it was, just not gelling the losing teams on Friday. And then as you said in the Cape game on Saturday. But yeah, this was a great game for Brian Timpson and his kids.
Yeah.
Especially after giving up 27 points to Cape last time. I'm sure he challenged his defense and boy, did they come up strong in this one. So nice win for Appo and gosh, another trip to Middletown. That's As I said last week, one of the quotes of the year was the Middletown running back's name. Maybe it's a rivalry to them. I don't know. It's really not to us.
There were a couple Middletown players and fans in the stands last night watching the game because, of course, they're off. And we were trying to talk. I think it's Appo's first playoff win as a Class 3 or what would have used to be Division I team. I think they made the playoffs back when they were Division II, when they were playing with underclassmen, much like Odessa High. And I'm not sure whether they won or not. Website for Sports doesn't go that far back, and I couldn't get an answer from anybody this quickly. And so congratulations to Coach Brian Timpson, no matter what happens next week. Cape has been winless in the state tournament since 2008. They finished the season at 1-10, and they start their crusade to be moved down to Class 2 with that record. And again, we're not going to get into that. Let's go to Newcastle, where William Penn took down Hodson 41-6. 2 short touchdown runs by Holman in the first quarter made it 14-0. That's all that they needed. Marty, this was a game that if I had to pick an upset from the weekend in Class 3, this was going to be it. Hodson's big, they're athletic, but they are young. And you never know, what can happen in a playoff game. This score actually surprised me. Not that William Penn won, but that it was 41-6. And so I'm not sure how you felt about it, but that was my first take, is that I was disappointed it was a running clock because I didn't think it would be. This is one game I thought would be close of these 3.
Yeah, this was kind of the game that was indicative for me of the biggest surprise where there were no surprises. I thought Howard maybe would pull off the win at St. Mark's, and I thought Hodgson would definitely give William Penn a close game. But it's almost like the teams that got into the playoffs that were the upper seeds just decided, the teams that were at home just really focused in. And because any game that were may have been games during the regular season, and all 3 of the 3A games were rematches, but just absolute blowouts. It was like they really focused in. They weren't going to let this happen at home. And so a really nice win at William Penn. I did hear there was a pretty good crowd at William Penn, which doesn't surprise us.
No, there typically is, yeah.
Now it's tough because this was again, you're trying to sell a playoff matchup between 4-6 William Penn and 2-8 Hodgson, but the circumstances that they are, it's a really nice win for William Penn. They built up the 27-6 lead at halftime, and then of course sometime later in I believe the third quarter, beginning of the fourth, they started the running clock. And just to put a wrap on the 3A games, Caesar Rodney, Cape, and Hodgson finished their season a combined 3-30.
Yeah.
And that's just it showed. I mean, that's
Right.
they basically, going back to that old quote from the Cardinals coach Denny Green, they are who we thought they were. All
Right.
three of these teams
Yep.
were who we thought they were, as it turned out, and made for an unfortunate viewing experience for the people at the games.
Well, and I think again, I think it goes. The positive out of this is maybe it's going to make the change that those teams, those bottom three teams in Class 3, maybe not have the opportunity to be in the playoffs.
Yep.
And what would be interesting, Marty, for them to do is ask the kids. Ask the players. Would you have rather? And be honest. At this point, you can be honest because you're out of the playoffs. Do you, in hindsight, would you have rather not been in the playoff game because of everything? And that's sometimes something we forget to do. You can ask the coaches, you can ask the ADs, you can ask the parents, but has anybody asked the kids to find out whether, after a total of 3 combined wins for those 3 teams, whether it was worth it? And again, to your point, it goes back to, was it worth it for these other teams who have a somewhat legitimate shot in most cases to go on to the state championship game to run the risk of injury? All right, let's go to our top performances. I'm going to start with DMA's Nathan Owens. I'm not sure what he did in the football game, Marty, but this kid's got a 4.5 GPA at a tough school. He was the DIAA scholar athlete for that game. Something AA started doing several years ago, which I like, is they award a scholar athlete award. Nothing to do with how you do in the field.
Yep.
It's how you're doing in the classroom. And so hats off to DMA's Nathan Owens. And I'm going to add a player. I'm going to let you. I've got a couple, so I'll let you give your player of the week first.
My guy, I'm going to go with the guy who was the workhorse for, William Penn all season. That's Markel Holman. 4 touchdowns, a workmanlike performance for him against, there's no stats, but 2 touchdowns in the first half, 2 touchdowns in the second half. They got a TD pass from Joey Tiberi at some point too, but Markel Holman has just racked up incredible stats this season. He's been the go-to guy for William Penn, and he was again yesterday as they move into the second round.
All right, so I'm going to go with St. Mark's wide receiver Logan Klein. He had both their touchdowns in that first half in the 14-6 win over Howard. I was watching it. I'm not sure who he ran over, but he ran over somebody good on the one touchdown running down the sidelines. And so hats off to Logan Klein. My top team or unit is the St. Mark's offensive line because of the way they allowed the running game to function in the second half. If that running game doesn't function, the clock doesn't run. And basically Howard ran out of time. They didn't run out of ability. They ran out of time. And so hats off to the St. Mark's offensive line.
I believe it or not, I had the St. Mark's offensive line on my short list as well, but I ended up going with the DMA special teams. You don't often see 2 block punts for touchdowns. You certainly don't see one just taken out of the air as the punter goes to punt it for DMA. So their special teams were just all over the place. Anytime Concord had to punt the ball, the stadium, I don't care if you're a DMA or Concord fan, your heart was in your throat waiting to see how many guys ended up piling on top of the punter. So the DMA special teams, just an incredible job in getting the monkey off their back in their first ever playoff win.
So there's our top performer and our top performance for the first round of the 2021 playoffs.